What would you do if you saw someone wearing a symbol you didn't agree with, standing calmly in a public place? Would you judge them, ignore them, or wait to see the person behind the image? This is the story of a man in a MAGA hat who walked into a bank and left everyone stunned, not with his words, but with a secret no one could have predicted. The door to the bank swung open, and in stepped a man wearing a bright red MAGA hat. The conversations around the room came to a sudden stop. Heads turned, eyes narrowed, and whispers started to spread like wildfire. Some stared openly, while others exchanged smirks or disapproving glances. He moved calmly to the back of the line, seemingly unfazed by the silent tension his presence created. But the atmosphere was far from welcoming. A woman in line shuffled her purse closer. As if instinctively guarding it, a man whispered to the person beside him, loud enough to be heard, "Typical, bet he's about to make a scene." The man didn't react. He simply waited, his expression unreadable. But when he finally reached the counter, the teller's frosty demeanor confirmed what everyone else was thinking. He was being judged before he had even said a word. "ID and account number," she snapped, her voice void of the usual politeness. It wasn't just the hat, it was what people assumed it stood for. And this was only the beginning of the surprises this man had in store for everyone watching. The man slid his ID and account number across the counter with calm precision. The teller, a young woman with a sharp, practiced smile, glanced at the documents and immediately raised an eyebrow. Her demeanor shifted from polite indifference to thinly veiled annoyance, the kind that makes you feel unwelcome without a single word being spoken. She held his ID up to the light, as if checking for counterfeits, her lips pressed tightly together. "One moment," she muttered, her tone clipped. She didn't bother looking him in the eye, her attention fixed instead on her computer screen as she tapped the keyboard more forcefully than necessary. Behind him, the line of customers grew restless. A man in a suit leaned to whisper to the woman beside him. "He's probably trying to pull some scam. You know how those people are?" The woman nodded, her eyes flicking toward the red hat on the man's head. "They always act so entitled," she whispered back, her voice tinged with disdain. The teller sighed loudly, enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I'll need to involve the manager for this," she announced, her tone making it sound more like an accusation than a procedural step. Her fingers pushed the ID and account number to the edge of the counter with unnecessary force, as though distancing herself from him. Whispers in. The bank grew louder, no longer hushed. A middle-aged man muttered to no one in particular, "Bet he doesn't even have an account here." "Typical." Another customer chimed in, "Always looking for trouble." The man stood quietly, his face revealing nothing. The judgment surrounding him was palpable, but he neither defended himself nor retaliated. He simply waited, his gaze steady, his posture relaxed. If he felt the hostility, he didn't show it. The manager, a stern-looking woman in a grey blazer, appeared from the back office. She approached the counter. With brisk steps, her expression exuding authority and impatience. "What's the issue here?" she asked, glancing between the teller and the man. The teller didn't hesitate. "He's asking for a transaction." "That seems unusual," she said, her tone heavy with implication. She didn't elaborate, but the message was clear. This man doesn't belong here. All eyes were on the manager now, who turned her attention to the man. Her gaze swept over his red hat, his calm stance, and the subtle confidence in his demeanor. There was something about him that didn't quite align with the assumptions swirling in the room, but she couldn't put her finger on it. The man met her gaze with unwavering calm, his silence almost unsettling. In its confidence, he extended his hand, gesturing to the documents on the counter. "You'll find everything in order," he said, his voice steady and polite, yet carrying an undertone of quiet authority. Despite the escalating tension, there was something about his presence, a quiet strength that hinted this wasn't the first time he had been underestimated. And though no one in the room realized it yet. They were moments away from a revelation that would turn their assumptions upside down. As the manager reviewed the documents, her sharp eyes darted back and forth across the papers. The room had gone eerily quiet, save for the occasional shuffle of feet or a muffled cough. Customers craned their necks, trying to catch a glimpse of what was happening at the counter. The man stood motionless, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the counter. There was no sign of frustration or impatience, just a quiet, composed confidence that seemed almost unnerving in the face of the clear hostility around him. The manager finally looked up, her face a mixture of confusion and realization. "Sir," she began, her tone softening ever so slightly, This appears to be a very significant account." Her eyes widened as she scanned the rest of the documents. "Are you the sole account holder?" The room, once filled with judgmental whispers, was now a vacuum of silence. The manager's words had sparked curiosity. What could she possibly mean by significant account? "Yes," the man replied simply, his calm tone carrying the weight of authority. He gestured toward the documents. "It's all there. The transaction shouldn't be an issue." The manager hesitated, then leaned in closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but those nearby could still hear her next words. "You're the donor behind the Community Revitalization Fund?" Her face flushed as she processed the truth. Several customers who had been sneering minutes earlier now wore expressions of disbelief. One man whispered to his wife, "Did she just say Revitalization Fund? The one funding the new school downtown?" The man nodded. "That's correct. I've been working with this bank to ensure the funds are allocated appropriately. I came here today to finalize the next installment." His words were calm, matter-of-fact, but their impact was seismic. The tension in the air shifted. The customers who had been quick to judge now exchanged guilty looks. The teller, who had all but dismissed him, stood frozen behind the counter, her face pale as realization dawned. She had treated one of the bank's most important benefactors with nothing short of disdain. But the man didn't dwell on their reactions. Instead, he glanced at the manager, who was now visibly flustered. "Is everything in order, or should I come back another time?" he asked, his voice neutral, though there was a faint edge of irony in his words. No, the manager stammered. "Everything is perfectly fine. Let me take care of this personally." She shot a sharp look at the teller, who quickly stepped aside, her head bowed in embarrassment. The room was no longer charged with judgment but with shame, and yet the man remained calm, almost as if he had expected this reaction. For him, this wasn't just about a transaction. It was a silent lesson for everyone present. The manager, now eager to correct the situation, processed the man's request with unprecedented speed. She spoke in hushed tones, ensuring everything was handled with utmost care. Meanwhile, the other customers stood frozen, their eyes glued to the man who had silently unraveled their assumptions. As the transaction concluded, the manager handed the man his documents with both hands, her posture now exuding respect. "Thank you for your patience, sir," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "And on behalf of the bank, I'd like to personally thank you for everything you've done for this community." The man nodded politely. "I appreciate that," he replied. His voice was calm, but the weight of his words hung in the air, a stark contrast to the hostile reception he had endured just moments ago. One brave customer finally spoke up. "Excuse me, are you really the donor for the school and the community projects?" Her voice was filled with a mix of awe and guilt. The man turned to her, his expression softening for the first time. "Yes," he said simply, "but that's not why I'm here. I came because I needed to ensure the funds are managed properly. These projects aren't about me, they're about giving others a fair chance." The room erupted into murmurs of disbelief. Customers who had judged him so harshly were now whispering apologies under their breath. The same man who had muttered about a scam earlier now avoided eye contact altogether, his face flushed with shame. The teller, still lingering by the counter, looked as though she wanted to disappear. I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice barely audible. The man gave her a faint smile. "Don't apologize to me," he said. "Just remember, everyone deserves to be treated with respect, no matter what they look like or what you think you know about them." His words landed like a hammer in the room. People shifted uncomfortably, the weight of their earlier actions now impossible to ignore. The man picked up his documents and turned to leave, but before he reached the door, he paused and looked back. "I'm not here to teach lessons," he said, his voice steady. "But if today made you think twice about how you treat people, then maybe some good came out of it." And with that, he walked out, leaving behind a room full of humbled faces and a silence heavy with reflection. As the door closed behind him, the silence in the bank lingered. No one dared to speak for several moments, each person lost in their own thoughts. The whispers, the judgments, the sneers, all of it replayed in their minds with sharp clarity, and now every single one of them felt the sting of shame. The manager turned to the staff, her expression stern. "This was a wake-up call for all of us," she said firmly. "Our job is to treat everyone with dignity, no exceptions." Her eyes settled on the teller, who nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. One of the customers, the man who had whispered about a scam earlier, finally broke the silence. "I feel awful," he muttered. "He walked in here and didn't say a word to anyone. But we all just assumed." His voice trailed off as he stared at the floor. The woman beside him nodded. "It's scary how easy it is to judge someone just by looking at them. I'll never forget this." Outside the bank, the man in the MAGA hat walked down the street, blending into the crowd as if nothing extraordinary had happened. For him, the encounter was just another day, a reminder of the assumptions he faced, but also of the strength he carried in defying them. But for everyone in that bank, it was far more than a simple transaction. It was a moment of reckoning, a chance to reflect on their own biases and the harm caused by snap judgments. They had all learned a valuable lesson that day. Respect isn't just a courtesy, it's a necessity, one that shouldn't depend on someone's appearance or perceived beliefs. This story isn't just about a man in a MAGA hat. It's about how quickly we judge others without knowing their full story. How many times have we let appearances cloud our understanding of someone? How often do we miss the chance to show kindness instead of judgment? What about you? Have you ever been in a situation where you judged someone too quickly, or were judged yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge perspectives and inspire change. See you in the next video.